It was a Monday morning, and the political world was already buzzing with the latest developments in the case against Donald Trump. Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York, had once been hailed as a fearless champion of justice. Her case against Trump had made waves, with pundits and activists alike cheering her on. But something was happening now, something no one had expected. James had made headlines with her ambitious legal pursuit, alleging fraudulent business practices by the Trump Organization. She had promised to hold the powerful accountable, and for a time, it seemed like her case was gaining traction. Yet, as the months wore on, things began to unravel. Allegations of overreach, weak evidence, and even strategic missteps started to surface. Now, as the case limped into the courts for yet another hearing, James found herself in a legal nightmare of her own making. The momentum she once enjoyed was slipping away. This was no longer about prosecuting the rich and powerful, it had become a battle for her political survival. The courtroom was packed as the latest hearing was about to begin. Reporters shuffled papers, eager for the next bombshell in the case. James entered with a sense of urgency in her step, but her confidence had visibly faded. Her once dominant position seemed to be slipping through her fingers like sand. As the judge called the court to order, James's legal team huddled in quiet conversation. The stakes were higher now, but so was the scrutiny. Everyone in the room knew this was no longer just about Trump, it was about James, and whether she could keep her grip on power. Then came the moment that made her stomach drop. An unexpected turn in the proceedings threatened to obliterate everything she had worked for. As the judge settled into his seat, Letitia James could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The courtroom was electric with tension. The prosecution team had just presented what was supposed to be a pivotal piece of evidence, an intricate web of financial documents linking the Trump Organization to fraudulent reporting. It was meant to be the smoking gun, the final nail in Trump's legal coffin. But then, something unexpected happened. A quiet murmur spread through the courtroom as James's lead attorney, Sarah Monroe, stood up to address the judge. There was an odd hesitation in her voice, and she looked uncharacteristically uneasy. "Your Honor," Monroe began, her words hanging in the air, "we've just been made aware of new developments in this case. There have been serious concerns raised about the integrity of some of the evidence we've presented." The room fell silent. James could feel her heart pounding in her chest as all eyes shifted toward her. She leaned forward, trying to focus on the words being spoken, but it was like she was in a haze. Was this a strategic move? Or was her case crumbling before her eyes? Monroe continued, her voice trembling slightly. "It appears that some of the financial documents we've used to make our claims might not be as solid as we initially believed. We are currently reviewing the matter, and we request a brief recess to assess the situation." James's breath caught in her throat. The courtroom erupted in whispers, and for a moment, she felt the eyes of everyone in the room burning into her. It was supposed to be a clear-cut case. Her entire career was riding on this. How had things gone so wrong? The judge nodded, his face stoic. "A recess will be granted. You have 1 hour. Be prepared to report back." As the gavel slammed down, signaling the break, James's team quickly gathered around her. The room was chaotic now, people talking in hurried tones, glancing nervously at their phones. Sarah Monroe's face was pale, and her normally confident demeanor had evaporated. James could feel the heat rising in her chest as the realization set in. She had made her mark as the fearless attorney who took on the powerful. But now, everything she had built was hanging by a thread. "Letitia," Monroe said quietly, drawing James's attention, "we've got a real problem. We're going to need more than just a good argument. This evidence, it's a disaster." James's mind raced. She couldn't afford to let this slip away. She had already made too many enemies in high places. This case wasn't just personal, it was political, and it had the power to define her future. She had to act, and she had to act fast. The clock was ticking, and every second felt like an eternity. Letitia James stood in the hallway outside the courtroom, her back pressed against the cool stone wall. Her mind was spinning, the room buzzing with anxiety and frantic conversation. Her team was scrambling to figure out how to handle the unexpected twist that had just rocked their case. Sarah Monroe, still visibly shaken, approached James. "We've got a serious problem," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Some of the key documents in our case came from third-party sources. We thought we vetted everything thoroughly, but it looks like those sources might not be as reliable as we thought." James' stomach churned. This wasn't just a setback, it was a full-blown crisis. If the evidence fell apart, so would the case. But more than that, it could mean the end of her political career. She'd made powerful enemies in her pursuit of Trump, and if she failed now, there would be no coming back. "We need a solution," James said, her voice firm despite the rising panic inside her. "What are our options?" Monroe hesitated, then spoke carefully. "We can try to spin it, claim it was an honest mistake in the evidence collection process, but with the media watching every move, I don't know if that will hold up. If it's revealed that we were careless with such crucial documents, the public perception will be that we're weak, unable to go toe-to-toe with Trump." James clenched her fists, feeling the weight of the situation. She had always prided herself on being meticulous, on being the one to dot every I and cross every T. But now, it felt like the entire case was slipping through her fingers. "What about the other witnesses?" James asked, trying to regain some semblance of control. "Are they solid?" Monroe bit her lip. "Some are, but others, the defense has been questioning their credibility. There's a lot of back and forth about the validity of the statements they've made. And remember, we're up against a billionaire with endless resources and a team of the best lawyers money can buy." James took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "We can't back down now. We can't let this die." The pressure in the hallway was palpable. Reporters were already circulating rumors about the case's potential collapse, and the last thing she needed was for the media to pounce on her failure. She had to take control. She had to find a way to salvage her credibility, and the case. Her mind raced as she thought through her options. What if they could find another angle, something the defense hadn't expected? What if the case wasn't as doomed as it seemed? She had to keep fighting, for herself and for the people who had trusted her. Turning back to her team, James spoke with a newfound resolve. "We're not giving up. We'll find a way to turn this around. I don't care how hard it gets, we're in this to win it." Monroe nodded, her face still tense but now filled with determination. "Then let's get to work. We'll need everything we've got to pull this off." But deep down, James knew that time was running out, and every misstep could be her last. The tension in Letitia James's office was suffocating as the minutes ticked down toward the end of the recess. Her legal team was divided, some working furiously to patch the holes in their evidence, others trying to find a new angle they could exploit in court. It felt like everything had come down to this moment, one last chance to prove they could win. James sat at the head of the conference table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She stared at the documents spread out in front of her, feeling a growing sense of dread. The evidence was crumbling, the witnesses were under fire, and the press had already begun to circle like vultures, eager for the inevitable collapse. In a world where perception was everything, her image as a fearless prosecutor was at risk of shattering. Sarah Monroe paced nervously in the corner of the room, her phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, I understand," Monroe said, her tone clipped, "but we need something concrete, something that can give us a foothold in the courtroom. If we don't, we're done." James could hear Monroe's frustration echoing off the walls. She'd never seen her so rattled. As Monroe ended the call, she turned to face her boss. "We've hit a dead end. The third-party documents, they're compromised, and there's no way to make them credible in court. Our best shot now is trying to bring in new evidence at the last minute, but we need a breakthrough, and fast." James's mind raced, her thoughts a blur of strategies and possible solutions. She couldn't afford to lose, not now. Not when her political future, and the hope of holding the rich and powerful accountable, were on the line. Just then, an unexpected visitor arrived at her office door. It was someone James had never anticipated seeing in the midst of this crisis: Michael Grayson, an old rival turned ally who had once worked in the same circles as Trump. Grayson had always been a shadow in James's political life, someone she had kept at arm's length. But now, his timing was too perfect to ignore. "You look like you're in trouble," Grayson said, his voice smooth, almost condescending, as he stepped into the room. He closed the door behind him and casually took a seat at the table, a smug expression on his face. "Why are you here?" James asked, trying to keep the edge out of her voice. She had no patience for games, especially not now. Grayson raised an eyebrow. "I think you're in a bit of a bind, Letitia. You're not the only one who has access to information, you know. Maybe I can help you, if the price is right." James narrowed her eyes. She didn't trust him, not one bit, but she also knew she had very few options left. "What do you want?" she asked bluntly, already dreading the answer. He leaned forward, a glint of calculation in his eyes. "I have some information that could tip the scales in your favor. It involves some of Trump's inner circle, people who could testify about the operations you're trying to expose. They're willing to talk, but only under the right conditions. The question is, what are you willing to do to get it?" The room fell silent. James felt the weight of the decision pressing on her. She could turn him down, try to stick to her original case and hope for a miracle, or she could take a gamble, risk compromising her integrity for a chance to win. The stakes had never been higher, and she knew that whatever choice she made could change everything. "What do you want in return?" she asked, her voice cold, calculating. Grayson smiled. "You'll figure that out soon enough. But I think you'll find it worth the risk." As he laid out the details of his offer, James's mind spun. She had come too far to back down now, but the path ahead was murky, and the cost of failure had never seemed so high. The clock was ticking down to the end of the recess. She had moments to make a choice: stay on her current path and hope that things would somehow fall into place, or make a deal with the devil and play a game that could destroy her. The decision would come down to the courtroom. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Letitia James made her way back to the defense table, her decision weighing heavily on her shoulders. Grayson's offer had been tempting, perhaps too tempting. He had promised to provide key witnesses, insiders from Trump's circle who could testify to the fraudulent practices at the heart of the case. But in return, he demanded something that felt like a dangerous game: leverage in the upcoming political races. His price was steep, and James knew that accepting it could change the trajectory of her career forever. She had 1 hour to decide if she would make the deal with Grayson and risk her integrity for a shot at winning. The pressure was suffocating. As she sat down at the table, her legal team was already in full swing, preparing for the next phase of the trial. They hadn't yet known about the offer Grayson had made, and James wasn't sure how to break the news. She could already hear their objections, their warnings. But in her gut, she knew this could be her only way out. Sarah Monroe caught James's eye and quietly asked, "Are we ready to go back in?" James hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "We have no choice. We go in as planned, but I may need to make an adjustment." Monroe's brow furrowed. "What do you mean by adjustment?" "I'll explain later," James said, her voice firm. "For now, just trust me." The courtroom doors opened, and the buzz of the crowd intensified. Reporters, spectators, and legal analysts filled the space, all waiting for the next twist in what had become the most closely watched case in the country. As James took her seat, she could feel the eyes of the room on her. Every move she made was under scrutiny, every decision weighed by the public and the media. The judge called the court to order, and the proceedings resumed. The defense had presented their argument, a mixture of legal maneuvers meant to discredit the prosecution's case. Trump's lawyers were relentless, poking holes in the credibility of the witnesses and casting doubt on the authenticity of the evidence. James felt the weight of every word, every gesture. It was as if the room itself was closing in on her. Her mind kept drifting back to Grayson's offer. If she could get the insider testimony, it could be the breakthrough they needed. But what would it cost her? What would she have to give up? As the defense wrapped up their arguments, James knew the moment had come. She turned to Monroe and quietly said, "We need to request a recess." Monroe raised an eyebrow, but didn't question it. "Got it." The judge granted the recess, and James's legal team huddled around her once again. The room was filled with tension as she broke the news. "I have a plan," James said, her voice steady but carrying an underlying urgency. "We're going to bring in new witnesses. Key people from Trump's inner circle. They have the evidence we need." Her team exchanged confused glances. "How?" Monroe asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "We don't have anyone lined up like that. This case is falling apart. If we're bringing in new people, we need time to vet them properly." James shook her head. "Time is a luxury we don't have. These witnesses are already in position. I have a source who can make this happen, right now. But it's not exactly by the book." Monroe looked skeptical. "Are we talking about Grayson?" James nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the decision settle in. "Yes. I know it's risky, but it's our only shot." The room fell silent as her team processed the news. Finally, Monroe spoke. "This is a dangerous move. If we do this and it backfires, it could be the end of you, politically, professionally, everything." James met her gaze. "I know. But I can't lose this case. I can't let this be my legacy. We have to do whatever it takes." Monroe sighed, clearly torn. "Fine. But we need a solid strategy. No half measures. If we're doing this, we're all in." James's pulse quickened. This was it. The final gamble. The courtroom doors opened, and the judge called them back into session. With one last, lingering glance at her team, James walked into the courtroom, her heart pounding. She had made her choice. There was no turning back now. The courtroom was thick with anticipation as Letitia James made her way to the defense table, her decision looming large over the proceedings. Her heart raced, her palms clammy, but her face remained composed as the judge signaled for the next phase of the trial to begin. She knew that whatever happened next could determine the outcome of everything, her career, her reputation, and the case that had come to define her. The defense team was already bracing for what they anticipated would be more weak arguments from the prosecution. They were confident that the documents they had poked holes in, the testimony they had discredited, would ultimately bring down James's case. But they had no idea what was coming. James stood, turning to face the judge. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm but filled with an underlying force, "the prosecution has just been presented with new, crucial evidence. We would like to introduce new witnesses into the case, individuals with direct knowledge of the Trump Organization's financial dealings." The room went still. It wasn't common for the prosecution to introduce new witnesses so late in the game, and everyone knew this could change everything. The defense lawyers exchanged wary glances, but James pressed on. "The individuals we're prepared to present are insiders with first-hand knowledge of the fraudulent operations we've been alleging. These are individuals who were directly involved in the Trump Organization's financial dealings and have agreed to testify, under oath, about what they witnessed." The judge raised an eyebrow. "This is an unexpected development. Are you confident these witnesses are credible?" James paused, feeling the full weight of the room's gaze upon her. She had no time to second-guess herself. "Yes, Your Honor. We have vetted them thoroughly, and they are prepared to testify today." "Very well," the judge said, nodding slowly. "Proceed." As the defense team scrambled to respond, the court doors opened, and two individuals walked in, individuals who, by all accounts, should not have been there. The first was a man named Daniel Pierce, a former executive within the Trump Organization who had resigned under mysterious circumstances a year prior. The second was Rachel Ford, a former contractor who had worked closely with Trump's legal and financial teams. Both of them had been kept under wraps until now, and their appearance sent ripples of shock through the courtroom. Daniel Pierce took the stand first. He was a middle-aged man, his face hard but weary, like someone who had seen too much and was finally ready to speak out. He looked at the judge, then at the attorneys, before addressing the court. "I was with the Trump Organization for over 10 years, he began, his voice steady but laden with weight. I oversaw numerous financial transactions, and what I witnessed was deeply troubling. There were practices that I now know were fraudulent, intentionally misleading financial reports, false valuations of properties, and other irregularities that were deliberately concealed from investors and the public." Gasps rippled through the courtroom, and James could see the defense team visibly stiffen. Pierce's words were exactly what they needed, but the storm that was coming was about to change everything. The defense attorneys sprang into action, attempting to poke holes in Pierce's credibility, questioning his motives and whether he had any personal vendetta against Trump. But Pierce stood his ground. "I'm not here for revenge," he said, his voice firm. "I'm here because what was done was wrong, and people deserve to know the truth. I've lost everything for speaking out, but I don't regret it." Rachel Ford followed, her testimony even more damning. She spoke of the ways in which the Trump Organization had manipulated contracts and financial statements, using intimidation to suppress whistleblowers. Her account was chilling, detailing how she had been coerced into helping cover up questionable transactions, only to later find out the full extent of the deceit. With each word she spoke, the prosecution's case began to solidify in ways it hadn't before. The defense was scrambling to recover, but the damage was done. The evidence was mounting, and the narrative was shifting in the prosecution's favor. But James couldn't shake the feeling that this moment had come at a cost. The deal with Grayson had brought these witnesses to light, but the implications of that decision were far-reaching. She had gambled, and it was paying off, for now. But how long before the fallout of that deal would come crashing down? As the witnesses finished their testimony and the judge called for a break, James sat back in her chair, her hands trembling. She had done what she had to do to win, but at what price? The case had taken a dark turn, and while the light at the end of the tunnel was finally visible, the shadows of the consequences loomed large. The courtroom was eerily quiet as the last witness stepped down from the stand. The prosecution had presented its case with a newfound strength, and Letitia James watched the proceedings unfold with a mixture of pride and dread. Her team had secured the testimony of Daniel Pierce and Rachel Ford, former insiders of the Trump Organization, whose damning accounts had shifted the momentum in their favor. It seemed like victory was within reach. But as the judge called for one final recess before the closing arguments, James couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing at the edge of a precipice. Her decision to bring in Grayson had turned the tide in the case, but it had also left a lingering darkness behind it. The whispers about her willingness to make a deal with the controversial figure were already circulating through the press, and she knew the political ramifications of her actions could follow her for the rest of her life. Monroe approached James at the defense table, her face grim. "We've done everything we can. The evidence is solid, the witnesses credible. But Letitia, we need to talk about the elephant in the room. Grayson." James turned to face her. "I know. But we're too far in now to pull back." Monroe hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "What happens when this is over? Grayson has a way of making people indebted to him. If we win, there will be no escaping the consequences. You'll owe him." James's gaze hardened. "I don't owe him. I used him. He wanted to get close to power, to position himself for the future. But he doesn't control me." Monroe wasn't convinced. "You're betting everything on that. It's not just about winning the case anymore. It's about what happens when this is all over. Grayson won't let you walk away without extracting his price." James nodded, her mind swirling with the complexity of it all. She had fought tooth and nail to get to this point, but she knew that the victory might come at a far higher cost than anyone could anticipate. She'd been so focused on the present, on the immediate need to win, that she hadn't fully considered the aftermath. The gavel sounded, and the judge called the court back into session. It was time for closing arguments. James stood, her legs shaky but resolute. This was her moment. The crowd in the courtroom seemed to hold its breath as she walked to the front, the weight of her decision pressing on her like an anvil. "Your Honor, members of the jury," she began, her voice clear and unwavering. "We have presented irrefutable evidence of wrongdoing. The testimony we've heard today has shown, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the Trump Organization was involved in fraudulent activities that harmed innocent people. It is time to hold them accountable. It is time to put an end to the corruption that has plagued our institutions for far too long." She paused, letting her words sink in. The individuals who have come forward in this case have risked everything to speak the truth. They have nothing to gain but the satisfaction of knowing they did what was right. And I ask you now, to do what is right. Deliver a verdict that will send a message, that no one is above the law. James could feel the eyes of the jury on her, but in her heart, she knew there was no turning back. Whatever came next, whether victory or defeat, this was her moment to stand tall. She had pushed herself to the limit, and now she would let the chips fall where they may. The defense's closing argument was predictable. Trump's lawyers, who had been on the offensive from the start, tried to undermine the credibility of the witnesses and cast doubt on the integrity of the case. But James knew that, no matter how they spun it, the truth had been laid bare. The jury deliberated for hours, and as the sun began to set, the tension in the courtroom was unbearable. When the jury finally returned, the foreman rose to deliver their verdict. "Your Honor," the foreman said, his voice steady, "we find the defendant, Donald Trump, guilty on all charges of fraudulent business practices." A wave of shock and disbelief swept through the room. It was a moment that had felt impossible just days before, but now, it was a reality. James had won. The courtroom erupted into chaos, reporters rushing to get the first quotes, lawyers shaking hands and hugging. But for James, the victory was bittersweet. She had secured justice for those who had been wronged, but she knew that the personal cost would be high. As she walked out of the courtroom, the weight of the decision hung over her. Grayson would come knocking. There would be no easy way out of this. But for now, she had done what she set out to do. She had taken down one of the most powerful men in the country. And in that moment, she couldn't help but feel a fleeting sense of satisfaction, one that would quickly fade as the true consequences of her actions began to take shape.